I would like to take you to one of the most profound commentaries in the Bible about politics. It's a really fraught issue today, especially. And so let's go to this passage. It's First Samuel chapter 8. So this is the context. Samuel, who's a tremendously godly man, apparently his sons were not godly. So let's be careful before we're quick to judge each other. Even godly people can sometimes fail to raise up godly children. So let's not be too easy to point fingers and be judgmental on that lack of performance on raising up godly children. So but what happens here is that the leaders of Israel come to Samuel, this great prophet and leader, and they ask for a king. And I want to take you through what the Bible says about this. And what's really interesting is the commentary about that desire is it doesn't have good words to say about that. So let's get into it. So when Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. That's like the spiritual and military leader. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, the name of his second Abiah, etc. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Really wicked, quite bad, even though Samuel is tremendously godly, right? Verse 4. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Behold, you are old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. So they wanted to be like all the other nations and not ruled under God by a judge, by a spiritual judge, by a man set apart by God, right? Verse 6, but the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. So a really interesting comment. That God, it's kind of, they're like not a centralized nation. They're kind of a ragtag set of 12 tribes. And God chose to reign over them without a centralized kind of like political structure, that he took a spiritual leader to rally them together, and then God would be their king, and they'd have a judge underneath them. That's the judge. That's the word that, I don't know if it's the best translation, but that's the kind of leadership. And God says, no, they've rejected me when they want a king. According to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they also are doing to you. Now then, obey their voice, only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. So this is a warning now. You're going to get a king. God's going to say, okay, I'll give you what you want. But it's going to be bad. And so here are the words. Here's the warning. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his instruments of war and the equipments of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. In other words, a king is going to naturally amass power and use that power and use you for his own self-interest and benefits. Right? He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take so in other words, those who work for him, they're going to benefit from it. And then they're going to want to work for the king so that they can give the favor of the king and they can use the people for their own benefits. That's what he's talking about. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks and you shall be his slaves. That's the word he uses. That's the word that Samuel uses. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day. So it's a very interesting, it's a fraught and very mixed message. On the one hand, God said, okay, I'll grant you what you want. But then Samuel, go tell them that they're going to get a lot more than they want. That there are these unintended consequences. And what I really want to say here is we're living in a time when right now people are very, very fixated and they care so much about politics. Our time thinks that we can fix what are essentially moral and spiritual problems with politics. It's a really bad and foolish, grasp. And of course, our time doesn't think, we're a very secular age, and even the Christians often don't think, well, the real serious problems in our society, we need the smart people, we need to work in our politics. And what I want to warn you is here's a time when Israel is looking for a political answer for their issues. They're looking for more power. They're looking for a king. They want to be like all the other nations. Make us like other people instead of like this weird special people where that God reigns over us through this some kind of spiritual leader through a spiritual way. And yet when they want to, then give someone that much power, God says it's going to turn out bad for you. And herein, I think, is a very profound and deep warning about the ways of politics and the dangers of politics. And also, very much the dangers of putting our hopes in people. So, no matter what, it doesn't say if you have a good king, it'll turn out good for you. No, it says you're going to get a king, and this is the way it's going to turn out. So that it's not even just about whether the king is good or whether the king is bad. If you seek a king and then you have a king reign over you, he's still going to be a man, and this is what's normal among men. And one of the things I just really want to say to you in this day and age, brothers and sisters, this is the Bible's warning. This is the inerrant, inspired word of God's warning about how we think about putting our hopes in politics, in centralized power. Now, politics is actually a rather important thing in life. And of course, if you are a good citizen, you should take ownership of our society and pay attention to it and try to make responsible decisions and then influence others people in a more godly and wise way that blesses them, even and especially when they're not Christians. And yet, at the most central thing, we should have a deep conviction and a wisdom that really above and before politics, we should look at politics and say, it's going to rise and it's going to fall. And even if we turn to it and that there's going to be unintended consequences, I want to say that even if we get the leader that we want, it sometimes doesn't turn out well for us. And if God is merciful, sometimes even when we get the leader we do not want, sometimes he does good things that we did not expect. But what I really want to ask you to do is, especially for those of you who, and I'm a person that likes to follow politics and I care about politics. So I'm talking to myself too, especially if you care about politics, I really want to warn you, be careful before you get too angry or too judgmental or too condemning. This is the Bible's perspective on the raising up of kings and the centralization of power, that it is going to disappoint us. And I want to warn you to not put your hopes in people, even in pastors, right? Even in the leaders that you think are the very best. And I hope you think I'm a good pastor and the other pastors in our church are good pastors, and that the elders that we want to raise up are the very best elders, godly men, humble men, men who deeply trust in the Lord and seek his ways in the Bible. But even then, all men have clay feet. Samuel had clay feet, right? And the book of 1 Samuel is going to be like, well, there's going to be a man who seems like he's good at first, Saul, and then he turns out quite bad. And then there's a man who is actually among the very best, David, but he too has clay feet. And so don't put your ultimate hopes in people. Seek the Lord and trust that in his wisdom and in his grace, that he will make a way for us, even when it sometimes doesn't look good. And please, we need to push back about, in this very, very wicked and bad time where people think their politics is really what we need. And we're going to be filled with anger and division and condemning and hating other people because they have an opposing politics that you or I disagree with. So let's go to the Lord. Let's put our hopes in the Lord. and let's walk humbly and graciously toward other people, and definitely be praying for our leaders and thinking about them with the grace and mercy that we've received from Jesus. And ultimately, we need the great, great King, far better than Saul or David or any pastor or leader or any president. We need Jesus. So let's, of course, put our deepest hopes and seek after him. And always remember that it's not just some cheap thing, that his kingship, no matter who's president, who's governor, who's mayor, who our senators are, that Jesus is ultimately our king, and we're going to live for him no matter if the politics is going our way or not.